There are thousands of people online telling you how to use AI, how to prompt it, how to automate with it, and how to build businesses on top of it. Almost none of them have actually built AI software at scale. I've worked on and with AI for almost a decade, built a 1200 person AI company, and watched it reach the multi-million valuation. And what I'm about to tell you is not what any of these people are saying, because when you've built something from the seeds from the inside, you see exactly what AI is, what it isn't, and why most of what you're being told is a lot of hype, not necessarily reality. Look, what I had to believe, and to be fair, what I broadly still believe, is that AI will massively lower the cost of turning intent into software. And that part is real. I believe that software would become much more abstract, that people would be able to build, that the distance between I have an idea and I have a working product would collapse. I believe that the old craft barrier in software, syntax, boilerplate, a lot of repetitive implementation would compress. And I still think that holds true. Where reality pushes back is this. I think we all underestimated how much of business and software is not code generation. It's context, it's judgment, it's edge cases, it's integration, it's ownership. It's knowing why a decision was made 6 months ago and why it breaks if you change it now. So in those rooms, the story was often AI will automate the work. What I now know is AI is much better at accelerating fragments of the work than it is at owning the entire whole workflow without an enormous amount of structure around it. The real bottleneck wasn't intelligence in the abstract. It was memory, context, trust, system design. So I'd say, look, the vision was directionally correct. In many cases, even ahead of where we are now. Take, for example, how often we're using vibe coding tools today to generate the same features and functions. That idea of the reusable primitive, which is so important to what we're doing at Second Brain, actually is more important now than ever before, because we have seen in our own example the token cost to build the same feature over 3 or 4 iterations reduces by almost 98%. Imagine what that means. Imagine how many unique features there actually are in pieces of software and what that impact would be. And that is a belief that we had right in the beginning when we even started Builder. And that is the belief we still have now. So look, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the direction of travel, even in the 2020, 2022, 2024 or earlier, was pretty clear. I think what has really manifested itself is how important context and lack of silos is, that I think just did not show up as prominently because just the amount of software being built wasn't there before. So look, I think one of the really interesting things that I've noticed in AI today is there's a deep misunderstanding that people think all of AI is just about the model. And most of the time, it's not about the model. Then they think it's about GPUs. Most of the time, it's not about the GPUs. And actually, then they think it's all about, using generative AI. And actually, most of the time, it's not about using generative models. It's really a systems problem. Companies think that they're buying intelligence when what they're buying are very powerful, very intuitive, probabilistic interfaces that will only work well if the surrounding systems are well designed. This means that the right context has to be available, the permissions have to be clear, there has to be provenance that's preserved in what you're seeing in decisions. The workflow has to be structured to be AI first. It can't just be a human workflow automated by AI. The tasks have to be bounded, and somebody still needs to define what good looks like. And actually, that focus on good and intent needs to be 10x'd. Most AI implementations today are failing in companies because companies are just bolting on AI onto their existing organizational chaos and just expecting that clarity will come as an end. But AI does not magically repair a bad process. Fragmented knowledge, unclear ownership, weak decision making. In many cases, it makes it a lot worse, or it amplifies it. One of the words or sort of phrases we use at Second Brain is it's human dysfunction at machine scale. And so the fundamental understanding is really this. People think AI replaces thinking. In reality, AI punishes bad thinking and bad organization. And so if your business has a less than great context hygiene, fuzzy accountability, and no real source of truth, AI will often land you in more of a pickle faster, and it'll be more expensive to get out of because the proverbial train has sort of left the station. And the other thing to sort of keep in mind when we think about AI today is that we're so used to now trying to give it a big question. But actually, these systems work much better with small little questions that are compounding on each other. And that's when you start to get real merit and real benefit. And so some of the best system implementations you're seeing right now is, number one, a distillation of a question into little pieces. So you call it a chain of reasoning or a chain of thought, but really small bite-sized pieces. And then I think the second, which is really what we're working on as well, is this ability to compress knowledge into its unique Lego blocks or Lego bricks, and then map all the relevant context around those Lego bricks that exists across the diaspora of information that an organization has. And that's important because now you've got little steps and stable entities of knowledge. That's when the AI will start to produce you incredible outcomes. Before I go deeper into this, if you run a company or lead a team, the problem is probably costing you far more than you realize. Most organizations lose hundreds of hours a year simply because knowledge inside the company is fragmented across tools, systems, documents, conversations, and whatnot. I put together a free research briefing called the AI Memory Gap that explains why this happens, why current AI tools still struggle with organizational knowledge, and the new architecture that's emerging to solve it. If you want to understand how this will change how companies operate over the next couple of years, not even a decade, you can download the free briefing in the description below. You know, one of the most important things with Vision, it's got brilliant 2020 hindsight. You know, I think sort of when we thought about what we were doing at Builder, and even I guess what we're doing at Second Brain, we've modeled it on this idea that the craft barrier would collapse, therefore the cost of creation would collapse. I think the difference though is the hyper focus now needed on intent, on context hygiene, and actually what great looks like before you start building. The other really interesting thing is just to see how powerful teams can now become whilst they're small. You know, at Second Brain, we're nearing in on 12 people, and I would argue that we probably do about 60, 70 people's work. And I think that's really important. A tiny team today can do what a much larger team would have taken to have done in the past. You can build prototypes faster, you can experiment quicker, you can have iteration loops that are dramatically shorter. You know, this is really interesting. We sort of did away with this idea of product managers and engineers and quality, and we said, you know what, everyone's just a builder and it's full stack. And in the beginning, there was a lot of discomfort with it. Oh, but you know, I've always been a product manager, I stopped being an engineer so and so ago, or I've always wanted to be an engineer, I don't really understand product. And now they were using to help in the craft, but the focus was in all of those disciplines, the intent was super clear and it was very pure and it was very organized. And so as a result, you've had an organizational shift, and actually the act of getting something into existence has become much, much easier. What I think has been an interesting pushback and a learning lesson over the last at least 6-7 years is that we almost confused building software as the same as building a business. And in some respect, this goes back to the same analogy of sort of, you know, if when the craft was harder and slower and you needed more people and you had more debate, you litigated over ideas more. You know, you could argue that building software or building platform or building the base business sort of flowed together. But now that building software is so much faster, you've actually got a detachment in those two parallel swim lanes that were working before. Because actually, just because you can build the software faster doesn't mean you can build the business that much faster, because there's an amount of compounding and knowledge and thinking that you need to get through. We are preparing for an end of May launch, and we've revisited the sequencing of how we launch different things, you know, sequence different things so that actually they compound and they connect into each other. How do you integrate into the messy reality? Because, you know, you could have great presentations and models and workflows, but the minute you're in the real world and, you know, you've got people doing their own things with their own agenda, it doesn't necessarily stick as well. Handling support, compliance, finance, and maintaining a system, you know, as it scales. It's like, I always say this is a running joke internally. It's so much easier whilst we're the only consumer. The minute it goes into the world, we have to start thinking about deployment and updates and features and improvements fundamentally differently, support versus new things. You know, as software becomes easier to build, you want to build more. But then by the time it gets in the hands of a customer, it's so big that the discovery path becomes really difficult. And so you've got this conundrum, right? You wanted to build something more feature rich, more out of the box, and then the customer gets it, but they don't have that compounding knowledge you've gone through as you've been building it. And so now they're stuck at trying to figure out, how do you do task number one? And AI can make it easier to order the pizza, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have a world-class pizzeria. So yes, software changes forever, but the fantasy that all complexity disappears is just wrong. And in some ways, the easier it becomes to generate things, the more important judgment becomes, because now you can create a lot of really bad software or bad features just very, very quickly. And interestingly, all the AIs will always tell you, well, that's a great idea. Look, I think we're in a world where there are so many tools, so many how-to guides, so many ways that you're going to build OpenClaw and go buy a Mac Mini. I think the important thing to realize is it's going to be 10 times harder than the demo reads. You're going to really struggle with memory and workflow and the evaluation loops. So be really clear why you're doing it. If it's just a thought experiment, it's really important to start thinking through a sort of a systems view of how this thing is going to help whatever process or business function you're looking at. What I'd say is, and this is for all demos, every AI product looks magical in a demo. Everything looks magical in a demo. The real question is what happens when the demo excitement disappears, day 30, day 90, day 180, when it has to operate inside your actual business, do the thing that you wanted to do, deal with your messy data, the permissions, because you don't want the intern and the CFO to be able to access all the same information. Your exceptions, your politics, your edge cases, your need for accountability. Before you sign on that dotted line to spend a lot of money, be very clear, is this the thought experiment or is this really something that you want to take into production? If it is to take into production, where is the system going to get its context from? Do you even have a shared context currently in the organization? How does it know what's true? How do you evaluate whether it's right? Who will review it? And what happens when it goes wrong? The real question is this just a prettier interface or are you getting a real workflow outcome? And I'd say if you're getting vague answers to any of these, you're probably not buying transformation, you're buying an expensive experiment. And I definitely think AI theater or AI experiments are going to be some of the most expensive line items for the next few years. And listen, you may learn through them anyway. So this is why I started with, is it a thought experiment or is it a practical implementation? So this was more operational business information. If you want to know what it means for employees, watch the next video.